I pulled over so fast the tires squealed. I had been driving for 11 hours straight, counting down exits, running through the mental checklist of everything I was finally going to do with the half-acre lot I had been holding onto for 5 years while working overseas. I had the original survey in my bag. I had a contractor lined up for Monday. I had been thinking about this piece of land the same way other people think about coming home. I found instead was fresh asphalt, electronic entry gates, numbered parking spaces, and a sign that read Sycamore Ridge HOA resident parking, $85 a month, 60 spaces, all occupied. Somebody had been running a commercial parking operation on my land since I left. I want to hear from anyone who has dealt with HOA overreach. Drop your city in the comments and tell me how bad it got, because what happened next will either make you furious or make you want to become an engineer. Possibly both. My name is Garrett Solis. I'm 40 years old and I spent the past 5 years managing water treatment infrastructure for a defense contractor in Eastern Europe. Before I left, I bought a half-acre lot in a suburban Illinois development with every intention of building a combination workshop and rental unit, the kind of asset that would generate income while giving me a real place to put down roots when I returned. I paid $41,000 for it in cash. I have the deed, the survey, the county filing, all of it in a fireproof box that has been sitting in my storage unit the entire time I was gone. I closed on the land in September 2019, spent a week walking the lot, staking out the footprint in my head, and then flew out of O'Hare on a gray October morning. 5 years is a long time to be away. I knew that when I signed the contract. The money was substantial, the work was meaningful, and the plan was specific. Come back with enough savings to build properly. No shortcuts, no debt. Every few months I would pull up a satellite image of the lot, and it would show exactly what it should. An empty rectangle of overgrown grass between a property line fence and a utility corridor. Then in late 2022, the satellite images started looking different. I noticed it from 6,000 miles away on a laptop screen at 11 p.m. on a Tuesday. The grass was gone. Something rectangular and dark had replaced it. I zoomed in as far as the image resolution allowed, told myself it was probably a construction staging area for one of the adjacent lots, and went back to the pressure readings I had been working on before I distracted myself. I did not follow up on this as aggressively as I should have. That oversight cost me roughly 20 minutes of shock on the shoulder of a suburban road in October 2024, watching HOA members park their cars on my investment. The office for Sycamore Ridge Homeowners Association was a double-wide trailer positioned at the lot entrance with the practiced authority of a structure that has been exactly where it is for several years and intends to stay. The sign on the door listed association hours and a name, Renata Voss, Community Operations Director. I walked in. Renata Voss was the kind of administrator who had clearly spent many years being the most organized person in any room she occupied. Mid-50s, efficient, with the composed certainty of someone who has processed a lot of complaints and resolved very few of them in favor of the complainant. She was entering numbers into a spreadsheet and did not look up immediately when I opened the door. I gave her a moment, then said my name and that I owned the land the parking lot was built on. She looked up then. What followed was a masterclass in institutional dismissal. She explained, with practiced calm, that this land had been classified as underutilized community space following an extended period of abandonment, that the association had conducted an improvement initiative with full board approval, and that the parking facility had been serving residents for approximately 3 years. She used phrases like good faith community investment and formalized under applicable statutes. She offered me a form to submit concerns in writing. I showed her the deed on my phone. She looked at it with the expression of someone who has been shown many documents and found most of them irrelevant. She said I was welcome to consult an attorney and that the association had very good legal representation. I thanked her and left before I did anything else. I drove to the county recorder's office and pulled every document associated with my parcel going back to the original plat. This is something I cannot recommend highly enough to anyone dealing with a property dispute. Start at the source, read everything, and do not rely on anyone else's summary of what the documents say. I found there took me about 4 hours to fully piece together, and when I was finished I sat in my rental car in the county parking lot and called my brother-in-law, who is a civil attorney, not because I needed representation yet, but because I needed someone with legal training to confirm that what I was reading meant what I thought it meant. I had photographed every page. I had organized them chronologically on the passenger seat. I had a yellow legal pad with a timeline and a list of questions. The same format I had used for years when troubleshooting infrastructure failures overseas. Because in my experience, the fastest way to understand a complicated situation is to build the complete picture before you try to explain it to anyone else. It did. The Sycamore Ridge HOA had attempted to file an adverse possession claim on my parcel in 2022, roughly 18 months after they had finished building the parking lot. Adverse possession is a legal doctrine that allows someone who has openly and continuously used a piece of property for a statutory period to eventually claim ownership. In Illinois, the required period is 20 years of continuous, open, hostile, and exclusive use. The association had been using my land for less than 2 years when they filed the claim. The filing was, to be charitable, aspirational. To be less charitable, it was fraudulent. The supporting documentation cited a version of the statute that does not exist in Illinois code. The notarized statements attached to it contained signatures that my brother-in-law described after reviewing photos I sent him as appearing to originate from the same hand. This was not a mistake. This was someone betting that I was not coming back. The association's attorney had apparently reviewed the filing and either missed these problems or chose not to flag them, which is its own interesting question. Either way, the claim had been sitting in the county records for 2 years without anyone challenging it, because the only person with standing to challenge it had been 6 time zones away managing water treatment systems for the American military. I spent the next 3 days doing something that my time overseas had made me very good at, building a complete picture before taking any action. I pulled utility easement records, construction permits, tax filings, and the HOA's own publicly available financial statements. Emerged was detailed and, in several respects, worse than I had initially understood. The parking lot had been built without a commercial use permit. The lot is zoned residential, and a 60-space fee-based parking facility operating with electronic gates and monthly billing contracts is not a residential use. The association had filed it with the county as a community amenity improvement, which is a different category entirely, and which comes with different permit requirements they had also not fully met, but which are at least designed for residential contexts. The electrical installations serving the gate motors, lighting, and payment kiosks had been pulled under a residential service classification. The actual load those systems draw is commercial grade. The utility company had flagged this discrepancy twice and received no response. And the money. Over 3 years at $85 per month per space, with 60 spaces, the gross revenue from my land was somewhere north of $180,000. The HOA's published financial summaries showed parking facility income as a line item and listed maintenance and operations as the corresponding expense category. The maintenance and operations number was approximately a quarter of the income. The difference appeared in the administrative expenses line, which is the category where associations bury things they do not want members to examine closely. I want to be clear about who was harmed by this beyond me. The residents paying those monthly fees believed they were paying for a legitimately operated community amenity. The newer residents had no idea the land had ever belonged to anyone else. The utility customers in the surrounding area had been absorbing slightly elevated distribution costs because of the misclassified electrical load, and the county had been receiving taxes on my parcel based on its classification as vacant land, not as an operating commercial facility, which is a different and substantially higher assessment. The person running this operation was the association's board president, a woman named Renata Voss's supervisor and predecessor whose name appeared on every significant document going back to the original construction approval. He was also, based on the financial records, the primary beneficiary of the administrative expense line that accounted for approximately $90,000 in unspecified expenditures across 3 years. I did not go back to the office trailer. Instead, I filed complaints simultaneously with 4 separate entities: the County Building Department for the unpermitted commercial construction, the Zoning Board for the illegal use classification, the State Public Utilities Commission for the misclassified electrical service, and the County Tax Assessor's Office for the incorrect property classification. I also sent a certified letter to the association's attorney, not demanding anything, just accurately describing the ownership situation and the associated filings. The attorney called me within 48 hours. I want to describe this call because it is instructive. She opened by characterizing the situation as a good faith misunderstanding that could be resolved through dialogue. I told her I was glad to hear that and asked when the association would be vacating my property and providing a full accounting of revenues collected. She shifted to describing the community benefits of the parking facility and the disruption that removing it would cause. I told her I understood those concerns and was willing to discuss a formal lease arrangement that would allow the facility to continue operating, provided the terms were equitable and properly documented. She asked what equitable meant to me. I told her it meant back rent at market rate for 3 years of commercial parking operation on a half-acre lot in suburban Illinois, which we both understood was a meaningful number. It also meant a proper lease going forward with commercially appropriate terms, correction of all permit and classification violations at the association's expense, and a complete financial disclosure so I could understand what had been collected and where it had gone. She said she would be in touch. The complaints I had filed moved at different speeds. The zoning board was first, They sent an inspector within a week who confirmed the use classification issue and issued a notice requiring the association to either cease fee-based operations or apply for a conditional use variance, which in this zoning district requires public hearings and is not guaranteed. The building department followed shortly after, with a stop work notice on the unpermitted construction, which technically meant the facility was operating without valid permits. The Utility Commission inquiry was slower, but ultimately more consequential. When their investigators pulled the service records and compared them to the actual electrical specifications of the equipment installed, they found not just the misclassification I had flagged, but a second issue. The association had been receiving a residential rate subsidy for power that was being used commercially. The difference over 3 years amounted to approximately $14,000 that had effectively been transferred from the utility's general residential customers to the HOA's operating budget. That is when the board president's name started appearing in a context that extended beyond civil disputes. I also spoke with 6 of my neighbors during this period, which required some thought about timing and framing. I want to be specific about how I approached these conversations. I was not trying to recruit allies or build a coalition. People had been living in this community for years. Their daily routines involved that parking lot. Whatever was going to happen next was going to affect them regardless of what I decided, and they deserved to make decisions with accurate information. I was trying to understand what residents knew, what they had been told, and how they felt about the situation now that they were learning the full picture. What I found was that most people had been told when the parking lot was built that the association had acquired the land through a legal process after the original owner abandoned it. Nobody had been told that the original owner was a defense contractor employee on a 5-year overseas assignment. Nobody had been shown the deed or the survey. They had simply been told it was community land now. Most of them were not pleased to learn the actual history. One neighbor, a retired civil engineer named Francis Chow, had been on the board when the parking project was first proposed and had voted against it on the grounds that the documentation supporting the adverse possession claim seemed insufficient. He had been voted down 3-1 and had resigned from the board shortly after. He had kept copies of the meeting minutes. Francis became an important resource not because he had any standing in the legal dispute, but because his documentation established the timeline precisely. The board had been informed, before the project broke ground, that the adverse possession claim would not be legally valid for at least 2 decades. The project had proceeded anyway. This meant the decision was not a misunderstanding. It was a calculated bet. The association's attorney came back to me 2 weeks after our initial call with a counterproposal. The association would acknowledge my ownership, vacate the adverse possession claim, and offer a market rate lease going forward. In exchange, I would release all claims for back rent and agree not to pursue the financial disclosures I had requested. I declined. The back rent question was not the primary issue for me. The financial disclosure was. I had 60 units in a residential community who had collectively paid $180,000 over 3 years for a facility built on land the association did not own, and I wanted the residents to understand where that money had gone. That is not an unreasonable thing to want. It is in fact exactly what HOA financial transparency requirements exist to provide. When I told the attorney I was prepared to file for a formal accounting on behalf of affected residents, who under Illinois law have standing to demand financial transparency from their association, she asked for another week. She called back in 4 days. The board president had resigned. He had submitted a written resignation to the board on a Tuesday with no public statement, which is typically how people leave positions when they understand that staying will make the situation worse for them personally. The association's board had voted to commission an independent audit. 3 new board members had been elected through an emergency ballot, all of them residents who had been openly frustrated with the previous administration's lack of financial transparency. The attorney was now representing the association in its new configuration and wanted to discuss a resolution that addressed all outstanding matters. This is what the resolution contained. Formal acknowledgement of my ownership recorded with the county, a lease agreement at commercial market rate for the land the parking facility occupies, a retroactive payment representing 2.5 years of back rent at that rate rather than 3, which reflected a negotiated compromise on the pre-audit period, a commitment to correct all permit and classification violations within 90 days at the association's expense, and a complete financial audit with results to be disclosed to all members. The audit, when it was completed, found that approximately $88,000 in administrative expenses over 3 years could not be substantiated with proper documentation. The auditor's language was careful and professional phrases like insufficient supporting records and requires further investigation. What the phrases described was roughly 88,000 euros that left the association's accounts in ways that could not be traced to any specific service, vendor, or community benefit. That finding was referred to the county state's attorney's office, which is where it currently sits. I do not know how that proceeding will resolve. I do not need to know. That is not my part of the story. I used the back rent payment to do what I had planned to do 5 years ago, build the workshop. It is smaller than my original vision because the lot is now partially occupied by the parking lease, but it is real, and it is functional, and it is exactly where I wanted to put down roots when I came home. My sons visited in March. My older one is studying mechanical engineering and spent 2 days with me going over the hydraulic lift installation, asking questions that were genuinely good, the kind that come from someone who has been thinking seriously about how things work. My younger one mostly wanted to know when I was going to put in a couch so he could watch football during the playoffs. I told him the couch was next. There is something specific about building a thing in the actual place you intended to build it, years after the original plan was interrupted, that is different from building the same thing somewhere else. It feels like a proof of something, not of winning exactly. More like proof that the plan was real, that the 5 years away were not a detour, but the longer route to the same destination. I walk into the workshop most mornings before I do anything else, have a coffee, look at the hydraulic lift, and think about what comes next. This is exactly what I imagined standing on that empty lot in October 2019. It just took longer to get here than I expected. That turned out to be fine. If you're dealing with a situation where someone is built on land you own, or is asserting authority over property rights you hold, the most important thing I can tell you is this: pull the original documents. Not a summary, not what someone tells you the documents say, the actual recorded instruments at the county recorder's office. Read them. Understand what they mean. If you do not know what they mean, find someone who does. Property disputes are won or lost in the filing cabinets of county courthouses, not in parking lot confrontations or online comment sections. The people who take advantage of property owners count on those owners never bothering to check. Checking is free, it takes an afternoon, and in my case, it was the difference between walking away from something that was mine and understanding exactly what I was holding. Drop your HOA story in the comments. The more specific the better. General frustration is everywhere, but the details are where the real patterns are, and the real patterns are what helps the next person know what to look for. I will see you in the next one.